again at Matthew chapter 13, verse 1 to 23. Okay, and we notice that about half the parables of Jesus Christ are centered around economic topics. Okay, and the reason is because economics affects our lives. Okay, we are human beings, are different from being spiritual beings. Yeah, economics affects our lives, and Jesus used these topics to emphasize spiritual things. Okay, he used, as we see in Matthew 13, verse 1 to 23 here, about the parable of the sower. He planted on what? As he was sowing, he planted on, some of the seeds fell on good soil, others fell on rocky soil, others fell by the roadside, others among thorns. And he used that to explain the spiritual lives of human beings. Those who accept the gospel and it actually means something for them are those that have hearts that are prepared, a heart that is farmed, that is prepared and made ready for the gospel and well looked after, and it grows to a point that it becomes something, it bears fruit, and it yields tenfold, 100-fold, and so on and so forth. So he's using these economic principles to describe spiritual things. And about half of his parables do the same thing. And what I'm trying to say is that if the church is going to avoid the mistakes of the past, what happened during the Roman Empire? The church had dominated most of Europe and dominated most of North Africa. Not only North Africa, in fact, down about half of Africa. Okay? In some places more than others. And of course, down here, northern Nigeria, in Niger, in Chad, in Sudan, were less affected. The kings were all Christians. Okay? But they were less affected by the gospel. But it had done so. But because of the fall of the Roman Empire, a lot of the territory of the Roman Empire was taken over by other kingdoms. And that is what gave rise to the emergence of Islam. Okay? That took over that territory. And it took years and years and millennia before, up to half a millennia, okay, before Christianity was properly established in even the West, okay. But here, Islam took over most of that territory. So this is the issue. And this coincided with the prophecy, the biblical prophecy in the book of Revelation, that this will happen. Okay? And there's always a threat of that happening. There's always a threat of that happening. And we see it again. Another force is rising in the West, and that is atheism. It's atheism. And that is the force that's taking over the West. And you see Christians being forced into a mode of life that says that whatever they do does not have any, is okay as long as they make money, okay? As long as they make money. And Christianity is forced into an ideological mode that neglects its real nature, which is being a what? A spiritual activity. And yes, the ideological mode is important. And that's what we want to look at today. Especially when you talk about economics. How you make money is important. And this is what happened to us here in Plateau State. For a very long time, we were forced. Certain elders of the church were forced to teach us how to make money. Okay? Because they discovered that we were overly dependent on the resources that come from government. As different from the Igbos, who were very trade savvy, who made their money from what? Business activities, okay? The private sector. And the Hausas who are very trade savvy. The Hausas, of course, also have a lot of people who depend on government also. It's not like they are all trade savvy. But in Plateau, the absence of that private sector dominance also in the marketplace was very, very vivid. Okay? It was very vivid here in Plateau State. And so there was that effort to try and bring people to the point where that aspect of the economy was developed here in Plateau State. Okay? And this continued for years to show you the importance of resources when it comes to living your Christian life. It's not just about being a Christian, but the lack of resources affects the Christian life. Okay? And one of the things that I talked about in the previous video is that the church must be able to master the issues of economics if we are to avoid the failures of the past. Okay? And this is one of the things that Islam tried to affect, that gave it that dominance, and because it was very similar to Christianity, but it tried to solve those problems of economic what do you call that now? Economic downfall, okay? Try to solve the problem of economic downfall within that area called the Middle East. Now Jesus, if we are to solve this problem, if we are to look at this issue and really solve it, we need to go back to Jesus, to the Gospels, to see what Jesus said about the economy. Okay? So what I did is to go and look at all the parables of Jesus Christ. And I discovered that about half of them are based on economic issues. And I said, why is this? Because our lives are intertwined. Issues in our lives are intertwined. You cannot be a human being without depending on food, without depending on shelter, without depending on the things that affect the physical realm. And so when we look at these parables, we see why Jesus used these stories to talk about our spiritual life. And this should be a pointer to us as to how to live our lives. Okay? It should be a pointer as to how to live our lives. Let's look at the parable of the sower first. This is what we just read in Matthew chapter 13. Okay? The parable of the sower. Just as farming is a tedious and labor-intensive endeavor, building our spiritual life is a tedious and labor-intensive endeavor also, without which we can never attain any form of stability. Okay? It's a tedious. I remember we talked about this some weeks back. We tried to emphasize this very concept. Okay? And God created the world like that, to involve some toil, some suffering, as different from miracles. It is a principle that God tries to expose to us. You cannot suddenly grow spiritually without toiling on investing on your spiritual life. And what are those investments? Studying the Word of God, okay? Coming to church, okay? Painfully giving to the work of God. I tried to talk about that yesterday. When you remove tithing, that painful giving, that idea of participation, just like in a business, if you don't bring out your own part of the counterpart funding and you invest as capital for that business, will that business grow? Will you be a partner in that business? No.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with 2 insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.
The bishop of Rome, it was first of all the bishop of Jerusalem, okay? But it shifted after a while, it shifted to the bishop of Rome because of the presence of the capital of the Roman Empire, of course, in Rome, okay? It moved along, sometimes it was in Constantinople, okay? And then in Rome. So the bishop of Rome has been known after a while as the pope or the successor of their constitution. Well, of course, we know that the church has separated into parts. Okay? After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Christian church was now different from the world. Partly because of that separation, but with time, because of the cultural differences that they do, okay? The Coptic church is different, okay? The Orthodox church is different from the Catholic church. And this is what it is. And when you go to different countries like the Orthodox church is more popular than the Catholic church. And of course, even in the West, later on, we have the Reformation history and other denominations in the beginning of that. So you have all those different denominations. And for now, the Pope is only recognized by the Catholic Church, okay, as the head of the Pope of that church. The total number of Christians is about 30% of the world population. And that should be about how many? Maybe about 2.something billion, okay? Okay? Close to 2.2 billion. But Catholics are just about 1.something, okay? And it's a significant number because they are almost one half, yeah? Or the total number of Christians. So that is why it is important to recognize such an event and also participate in discussion about that, okay? Because the Catholic Church affects a lot of what happens in the world and the other people in the world. If you're looking at the announcement of the new Catholic Church, where the first of all, the old one died, and there is a new faith on the sea. So why is it important? Because of the history of the church. The history of the church. You know that the church was first together, okay? One body. Of course, under Christ, and when Christ ascended to heaven, he appointed Peter, okay? He appointed Peter to be the head apostle, okay?